Okay, so I have decided to try and do a few small videos that go through the process of creating an Arma 3 mission type, effectively copying or emulating the rush concept that you may know from Battlefield. So the idea is that there'll be a series of objectives that you need to meet, and kind of in a row, one after another, possibly 5 objectives, I was thinking. I was saying here it should be a script, not a mission, but I think I will start with a mission first and then turn it into a script. So I'll do my testing in a mission, I think. It should be roughly a straight line, as in you won't be sort of backtracking on yourself, you'd be pushing through a region. And ideally should end up with some form of either a pre-made military base on a map, or possibly sort of generating military buildings or structures randomly, but in a small area, to sort of recreate a FOB or something like that. I'd like to have within that some random op4 behavior, so possibly surrendering or retreating or flanking. I also wanted to build it in a way so that the player had a direct control of a sort of platoon level amount of players, so that they could change obviously, but would also fight alongside AI controlled platoons. And in this idea I've got, there would be limited vehicles, so it would be mainly a sort of an infantry based operation. So the things that occur to me straight away are, as we create elements randomly, we're going to need to know how to spawn them safely, as in not inside a rock or a tree. I'd like to know how to paradrop reinforcements. I'd like to also incorporate alternative injury system, because I think that's great, adds a nice dimension to your troop management. You could possibly also apply that to all units. Also, ideally we'd have some form of a kill counter, maybe not a ticker necessarily, but something to keep track of the losses. I'd like to build in some fade-ins and fade-outs, so if you're spawning in units or troops, I'd like to do that first and then fade in, so you don't see lots of things just appearing, because that's kind of immersion breaking. It should have automation of certain groups. It's kind of that really, just thinking there will be certain things that will be scripted to kind of keep the flow going. So in other words, you won't be required to do everything manually. I'd like to incorporate some form of a dialogue, as in screen freezes. You have a kind of entry, or you can select certain things, so you could possibly have a dialogue to kind of control roughly what the high command-y type elements are doing. So you could have a sort of aggressive command or a cautious command that could be applied to your AI platoons that are fighting alongside you. I'd also like some form of a display to come in there, so it's basically sort of overlaid HUD text to tell you when certain things are happening. I would like to have the ability to call in a surgical strike using voice attack. The game, or the mission type, should have an end state. You should be trying to achieve something. You should also have a fail state, so you know, if you fall below a certain number of troops, then mission is failed. Using the displays, we need, I think, some form of a cycle to explain what's happening, and I'm going to need to use markers quite well also. So there's quite a lot here, and what I'm going to try and do is do some sort of smaller tests to sort of work out how to build these things individually, and slowly build up this mission, so that at the end of it, hopefully, we will have this, which is something that you can jump into. single player, should say for now, and should hopefully meet at least some of these, if not all. But yeah, that's the plan, so let's see how it goes. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I've got a unit down, which is really all you need to play a mission, and I am going to save it, and I'm going to call this Rush. Now what we have is, as we saved the mission, we now have a file So now we've saved it, we now have this mission file called Rush, and inside we just have the one file which is mission. So we're going to create a document or file called init.sqf and accept that change. So basically whenever the mission fires up, init will run, and then the mission will run any script that you've got within the init. Okay, so we could just test that out by going int hello world. Okay, so hint hello world, saved. Now as I go back into my game and I run this, we should see hello world appear as a hint. Cool. So we can do something when the mission starts, so that's great. Okay, so I've taken some basic tips from the wiki, and what we have here is we've created a local variable called marker2 randomly. It just was from the examples. Then the command is create marker, the name of the marker, where it is. Then once you've created the marker, you can then call set the parameters basically of the marker that you've just created. So that is now that, and when you have that, you can then set the marker size, which is latitude and longitude, I believe. Then you set the shape, rectangle, the alpha, the transparency is 0.5, and the color is black, and that basically looks like this. So we could make that a bit bigger, I think. Save. Restart. Okay, so now we have a marker. We can now start doing things within the reference of the marker. So okay, progress. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to do is not generate the marker directly over the player, but kind of offset it so that the marker is a little bit behind the player but mainly in front of the player, because that's to indicate the flow of the mission. So I've used the get_railpos command, and what I've done here is I've got a local variable that contains the relative position from the player 800 meters away and 180 degrees behind the player. So this should effectively offset things behind the player, which is not quite what I want, but I just want to sort of show how this works. And then I've also used the outcome of this bit here to be the location of marker 2, and then from there on all these things apply to this position. So this is what it looks like. So my player is facing forwards, and I've got lots of space behind me, which isn't what I want. I want to have the player facing south, and I want the marker to sort of proceed ahead of the player. So just head back into the editor, position a player looking south, and then I'm just going to have this at 0 degrees 800 meters in front of the player. Save. Good. So this gives us the rough area of operations, I suppose, for this mission here. And looks like actually we could incorporate some of these towns in the flow. Anyway, this will do for now. Okay, so a quick spawn test. So we're going to create this unit at the position of the player, and we're going to group it into the players group. There we go. Cool. So I want to create some of these CBRN units because this is going to be some kind of compromised contamination zone type mission. So the CBRN specialist class is B_W_soldier _CBRN_F BW soldier. Okay, so we're going to do our first looping event now. So I want 10 units, but I don't want to have to type this out, obviously, 10 times. So we are running a basic for loop. So basically from 1 to 10 do this, and that gives us this result. Cool. Okay, so I've just done a bit of basic refactoring with the marker. So the way it works is I've renamed the local variable AO marker, and that is put down at the position relative to the player 800 meters in front. Then I take the same local variable and I create a marker at that position called marker2. I'm just going to call that marker 1, might make more sense. And that's created at that location, which is that location. And then these are all the sort of the parameters for the marker, so all good. Okay, so more changes. So now what we have, we've got our markers set up okay. So we've got the main AO marker centered 800 meters in front of the player to give it that forward motion flow. Then some parameters around what that looks like. We then create an op4 position. So we're taking the relative position of the player, in this case 50 meters ahead of the player, north of the player. And that is given the local variable op4 start. We then create some groups, and we're going to use these variables will hold the groups east and west. So we've created a red group, and what we're doing is spawning our CBRN units as per normal. That's in the group of the player. So actually I'm going to change that in a minute to blue group to make it a bit more consistent. And then I'm also spawning some op4 spec ops GHEX units, and I'm spawning them in at op4 start, which is 50 meters in front of the player, and that is obviously the baddie group. So let's see how that works.
Contact. 75 meters front. Rifleman. 75 meters front. Enemy spotted. Spec us. 75 meters front. Rifleman. 75 meters front.
We got a man down.
Right, so some minor changes here. So what we have now is a starting position of Op 4 250 meters ahead of the player, not 50 meters. And that's it. So we're just going to play this mission quickly and see how it flows.
Advance!
Back up. 75 meters. Front. Back up. 75 meters. Front. Back up. 75 meters. Front. Report position. We got a man down. Report position. He's hit.
Reloading!
Contact. Back up.
We lost one!
Okay, so the next thing I wanted to do was to start to create other AI unit groups who can kind of create a bit more atmosphere and do some fighting alongside us. So just to review what we've got here, we've basically got the script section to create the main area of operations marker, which is pretty much as it was. I've created two new AI group markers, left flank and right flank. So I'm facing south, so on my left that would be at my 270. It's 100 meters away from me, and I've called it left flank. It's 10 by 10 rectangle, and it's red. And then the right flank is on my 90, and same again. And what I'm going to do is, assuming this works, create alternative groups to be spawned at these locations. And there we go. Okay, so the next thing we're doing now is, so just quickly to review, we've got our AO marker position. We have created group markers for the left flank and the right flank. So those are two red squares that appear on each side of us. We then create the Op4 start position. Now the change here is that we've got the red group, and we've now got two blue groups, one for the left flank, one for the right. If we didn't do that, and then we created two separate group iterations, if we're using just this as it was before, group blue, they would both be in the same group and try and link up together. So we're splitting the groups into 1 and 2. Now this is our players unit group, group player, and now we have another 10 units on the right flank. So this unit is created at this position in this group, and then same for the left flank. in this group, and then we spawn the op4. So let's see if that's worked. Looking good. Okay, so this next test is pretty simple. We're just going to try and automate the moving of units around. So just going to create a slight delay in the script running, and then we're going to take group blue 1 and we're going to move that group to the position of the player. So let's see if that works. Looks good. Cool. Okay, so progress now is I've just taken out the automatic move of blue 1, and we're testing the creation of a new waypoint for blue 1 group. So we've got test position, relative position to the player, 100 meters away, 45 degrees. So I'm facing south, so this should be the blue 1 team. And then we're going to create a marker and set it at slightly larger so we can tell the difference. So if that works, then we can then send blue 1 to this new marker. So let's test that out. Good, so we can work with that. Okay, so the next section, let's see what we've got. Right, so we create the main AO marker position based on where the player is, and we're looking south, because the player is looking south, so that's 800 meters facing north, sorry, facing south. We then create the marker at this location, call it that. These are the parameters for that marker. Then we create AI group markers, left and right flanks, and we're basing that on our player relative position. That's 270 and 90 degrees, 100 meters apiece. So we've got 1, 2, 3 columns. Then we create an op4 starting position based again on the player's relative position, 250 meters ahead of the player facing south. We then create some group variables. So we've got a red group, blue 1, blue 2. Then we spawn the blue 4 units. So this first batch is the players. Then we do 10 for the right, 10 for the left. Then we spawn the op4 players using group red. For now, we just got 5 spec ops type dudes. Then we have a little rest. Then, so the latest bit is this, where we basically take the left and right flank positions that we've created, and based on those we create new positions south of them. So the local variable is blue 1 waypoint, and we get the marker position of the right flank, and then we set the blue 1 waypoint to a position taken from that, but 100 meters at 180 degrees, which is south. So starting again, we've got the local variable, which is getting the marker position of right flank. Then we take that local variable and we give it a new position, which is the original position, 100 meters south. Then we take that new position, so this local variable is now at this place here, and then we create a marker here called right flank waypoint, and at the location of blue 1 waypoint, which is that, and then we create our parameters for the marker, which in this case is blue, and then we do the same again for the left flank. So let's save and test. Good. Okay, so the next step here is to create a similar marker that we have for the left and right flanks, but instead of using the get marker position left or right flank, we're just simply taking it from position player. So the third player waypoint is equal to position player. Then we set that position, to the position plus 100 meters south, and then we do the usual create marker and so on based on that new location. So let's test that. That's looking good. Okay, so the next stage is to move the two groups to their respective newly created waypoints. So for this we're selecting each group, simple move command, and then to the get marker position of right and left flank. So let's see what that looks like. Looks good. So now I'm thinking what could be interesting is to create equal streams on the other side meeting in the middle. So you've got 3 separate battles potentially. So let's see if we can do that. Okay, so next thing we're doing here is creating 3 counterpart op4 markers that will be directly south of the blue 4 markers. So I've pretty much just copied the structure from this part here, and I've just changed a few things, basically the obvious things like the local variables are now op1 instead of blue 1, blue 2, and then the marker names op right, op center, op left. They are all 500 meters south of these marker points. So each one of these is 500 meters south of their partner marker. So this partner's marker is the right flank, this is the left flank, and this center point is player. But actually I've just realised this is the wrong way around. I think that's right. Let's try that out. Alright. So next we're going to be creating 3 opful groups down here to move north. Okay, so now what we have is we have our 3 generation points mirroring the 3 columns that are advancing south, and now we also have 3 spawners, op right, op center and op left. Drop the numbers down to 6, I think. Let's try this out. I've also adjusted the atmosphere slightly. See how this runs.
Spec off. 75 meters, front. Contact. Spec off. 75 meters, right up ahead.
Man down!
Report position. Spec up! 100 meters, front!
Spec up! 75 meters, front! Spec up! 100 meters, front! Soldier, 75 meters, front!
Nine! Do not fire! Do not fire! We got a man down! I need a medic!
Three, sit rep.
Man down! Man down! What's the position?
Okay, so the next thing I want to do is create a running counter that can help us keep a track of how everybody's doing and whether or not we need to move things forward or move things backward depending on how well or not well the battles are going. And to do this, I'm creating, instead of putting everything in this file, this is getting a bit out of hand, and at some point we're going to take elements out of here and put them in their own files, but for now I think it's fine as it is, so that can all sit there quite happily. But for the counter, I think that is definitely something we can put independently in its own file. So all of this has a run. None of this is looping apart from these limited duration loops, but you basically get to the end of this file and then this is the last thing that would run, which is simply activating another file in the mission structure. So you've got your mission, init, and you've got counter SQF. So this calls counter SQF, and at the moment, for testing purposes, It's simply a permanent sort of endless loop. So while this is true, which means that it's always going to be true unless we change it. So forever do this, which is system chat, wait 3 seconds, do it again. So let's just check that's all working okay. Yep, looks good. So now what we can do is decide how often we want to cycle this, and every time it cycles, what do we want to check for. And I think really at this stage we're just going to do some simple counting. Right, so we now have a basic counter running. So the script runs all the way down in a sort of linear fashion, gets to the end, triggers this file counter SQF. Counter SQF is don't worry about that. Simply a forever loop. While true forever, do 2 lots of counting. So 2 local variables. So for the east count, we have 2 conditions that you're checking in this block of code. So for live x and side of x equals east, then you count all of those units, and then system chat that and the number, and then you wait, and then you do the same for the west side. So the next thing I would like to try and do is kind of simplify the init SQF, and I'd kind of like to reserve that for your kind of core initialization functions and triggers, and I try to keep the init as clean as possible. So what I'm going to do instead is create a secondary file created when init runs that will manage all of this stuff. For now I'm just going to chuck it all into one file. It's all going to run once, but then what I'm also going to do is set this up so that if the enemy count is 0, then we run the code again, and then hopefully everything kind of resets and you can kind of continue through the map. So that's the plan. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, so the next phase, we've kind of split things out a bit. So simply in the init SQF now we've got 2 things happening. We are triggering the wave SQF file, which is most of all the stuff we've been working on here. Then we wait 10 seconds and then we initiate the counter SQF, and that's just there to let everyone spawn correctly, so the first counter is correct. The counter itself is quite basic. We've gone through this previously, so I won't go over it again. The only change here is this if statement at the end. So all this does is check to see whether the number of live enemy units is equal to 0, and if it is, then it runs wave SQF and tells you that we're going again. So this is a step towards persistency, but it's not perfect because it doesn't have any controls over unit spawning. So if you do this a second time, you'll just currently redo all of the spawning. So we need to fix that, but one step at a time. So regardless of whether this is a second call or whether it's the first call, this is the file that pretty much does all of the thinking. So again, you've got your main AO, you've got your markers for the left and right starting points. We can probably get rid of those thinking about it. Then we create our groups, then we create our blue 4 units, 3 columns. Then we create the markers that we're going for. Now one change here that I've just remembered I need to do is when you are recreating a marker. So if you create a marker for the first time, it just is created, that's fine. If you rerun this and you try to create another marker, it won't show in the new position unless you delete it first. So as a general rule, if you're reusing markers, just include the delete command before you actually create it. So for the first time, this won't do anything because it doesn't exist yet. So it just, I think, is just ignored. But for all future runs of this, let's say you ran this once and it was created at this point here. If you run it again without that line there, then this will still be the same. So I believe that should work. We'll test this out anyway. So we've got the waypoint markers here. So basically the 3 objectives that our teams are moving towards. These are our move orders. Now the op4, we've got the spawn points, I believe. Yeah, these are the initial spawn points, and here is the actual spawning commands, and here are the move orders. So it's all pretty basic, but it quickly sort of grows. So at some point I think we're going to split this out a bit into sort of marker generation, unit spawning, and some rules around that, and then work on the orders. But let's see how this runs for now. And as we're testing, I'm just going to speed this all up a bit. So we've got 18 enemy, 31 friendly.
Enemy spotted. Soldiers, 100 meters left.
Back up, 75 meters. Right. Man, 100 meters. Front.
Soldiers, 100 meters front.
Back up, 100 meters. Front.
100 meters front.
Back up, 100 meters. Front.
Rifle, 100 meters front.
Back up, 100 meters. Front.
Man, 100 meters front. Fall back.
Understood. Fuck, man down. Medic!
Okay. 0 enemies. let's give it a minute. I think I had a 30-second delay on this. Okay, so you can see here now we've got 54 friendlies, so more units have been generated regardless of what was there before. And let's just see how many Op 4 are created. 18. So let's just do one more round.
Rifleman, 75 meters back.
Contact. Rifleman. 100 meters front.
Soldier, 75 meters back.
Rifleman, 75 meters front.
There's an enemy. Four, 75 meters just up ahead. Man, 75 meters right.
Spec up. 100 meters front. Spec up. Soldier. 75 meters front.
Five, cease fire. Do not fire. Man, 75 meters right. He hit. Five, man down.
Spec up. 75 meters front.
Rifleman, 75 meters right. Rifleman, 100 meters front. He hit. Spec up, 75 meters front. Spec up, 100 meters front. 12, cease fire. Do not fire.
Spec up. 100 meters front.
Need help. Shit, got a man down. Need help. Rifleman, 100 meters front. 20, do not fire. Do not fire.
Spec up. 200 meters front. Soldier. 200 meters front.
Man down.
Spec up. 200 meters front.
Shit, we got a man down. Hostile down. Rifleman, 200 meters front. Medic. We lost him. Back up, 100 meters to the left.
So I think we've got some work to do in terms of the generation of the markers, because this is obviously wrong. Not wrong, but not quite what we want. And also we've got some work to do to sort out the number of units in play here, because that's not a fair fight, and it's also going to kill my frames. So yeah, we'll continue to work on this. Okay, so I've spent some time tidying things up, and I want to talk you through the changes, because there are some new things here. So first of all, in the init SQF, this runs once on mission start, and on mission start you get the markers SQF file created and the mission params SQF created and run. And then you wait, and then you initiate the counter SQF. So just looking at the mission params very quickly, at the moment this doesn't do anything. This is simply a global variable of the number 5, and at some point we're going to use that to make decisions about what we're going to spawn and whether things should be spawned. But at the moment every time things cycle, a ton of new units gets created, which obviously is not what we are going for. So that's just there as a placeholder, really. Then what I've done is I've split out the markers and the kind of this generation, the spawning, and the ordering of the units. So what will happen on mission start is you'll run markers SQF. So markers SQF, as you might imagine, is just the marker stuff, with at the bottom calling of the wave SQF, which is you've seen all of this before. This was just extracted from the previous file, and we kind of just split things up to make things a bit easier and more manageable. So this file now holds group creation, as we've seen, spawning, and movement orders. And these movement orders are all based on the marker positions. And these creation points are all based also on marker positions. So the get marker pos is a useful thing for us. So just going back to the markers file, we have this main area of operations, kind of dark grey rectangle, which we may or may not use, but for now it's useful just to give you an idea of where things are. I've made one change. I wasn't getting the results I wanted from get rel pos, so I've just changed this to get pos, and I think this is going to need some tweaking, and like I say, we may take this out altogether, but now I'm also getting using get pos instead of get rel pos for the left and right flanks, so they will always be kind of on the 270 and 90 as per the compass rather than as per the direction that I'm facing, which is a bit more what I'm trying to get here. Then so these are our creation markers, which we can probably get rid of actually, or at least we don't need to mark them on the map. They'll just appear, but we'll leave them there for now for context. Then we have the 2 waypoint markers for the left and right flanks. So this is basically moving towards these objectives that we're creating. And then there's a third objective which is for our own player to move to. And again, we could take this out, and I'm thinking maybe the way the mission should run is that the player's team is there to support the left and the right flanks, and at some point maybe we can work out which team needs more assistance, and then you can be a bit more reactive to how the mission is flowing. Then we have the 3 spots for the creation of the op4 units. So there's 3 Op4 columns. Again, we're using getPos instead of getrelpos. So yeah, that is all of the marker activity in one place. And like I said before, at the end we then call wave SQF, which then generates activity based on the marker situation. So if we run the mission from cold, then all the markers are created, and then all the units are created, and then they move. Once we get through the first wave, and there is, don't forget, our counter running in the background, every 30 seconds we do a check to see if the alive east is equal to 0, and if it is, then we go again, and at that point we run markers again. So this will be run periodically on each wave, so that's why we need the delete marker, because these are going to be reused, these markers are going to be reused, and if you're reusing markers, then you need to delete them before you reuse them. And then obviously, as before, you run through your new markers, and then you generate your activity. So that is the plan, and we're going to just quickly test this out. And I am expecting, if we get through the first wave, which we will do, because the first wave is numbers are stacked against them, I'm expecting a whole ton of new units to be created, so that's an issue we need to overcome. But yeah, that's where we are, so let's see if this works. And yeah, first of all, you can see that the AO is not as we want it. That probably should be more of a general square. Anyway, 2 flanks are moving in as we want.
Advance! Soldiers, 100 meters front.
Spec off, 100 meters, front.
Spec off, 75 meters front.
Spec off, 75 meters, front.
Report to position.
Infantry, 75 meters front.
1, cease fire.
Riflemen, 75 meters right.
I need some help here.
Spec up, 75 meters front.
What's your position? Fire! Fucking cease fire! Do not fire!
Gun man down.
Right, 100 meters right.
So let's see what happens here.
I'm covering. Go. Cover me. Covering. Go. Cover me.
Area clear.
So as we can see, everything is just pushed south of the player, which is kind of as we expected. The units are being created. This group isn't moving, interestingly. I need you guys to be moving in. Yeah, you can wave your arms around. So that's an issue, that these guys are getting their move orders and these guys are not. And I wonder if that's to do with the spawn times. Anyway, let's see where this goes.
Advance.
What's your position?
Land. 100 meters. Left. What's your position? Injured. Spec off. 100 meters. Front.
Soldier, 100 meters front.
Spec off. 100 meters front. Soldier, 300 meters south. I need a medic. Report position.
Spec off. 200 meters. Left flank.
Spec off. 100 meters front. Spec off. 75 meters front.
7. Sit rep.
Fuck, I'm hurt. Man down. Soldier. Spec off. 100 meters. Front.
Spec up. 200 meters front.
We got a man down.
Rifleman, 100 meters right flank. Man down.
Advance.
Spec off. 100 meters. Front.
11. Report in. Over.
Report position. We lost one.
He's hit. Report position.
Spec up. 100 meters. Front. We got a man down. We got a man down. Fuck, I'm hurt. Spec off. 100 meters. Right flank. Spec
Sit rep. 28. Report in. Over.
Spec off. 75 meters just up ahead. Report position. Man down. Man down.
9. Sit rep.
What's your position?
Spec up. 100 meters. Front.
Somebody help me!
22. Report in. Over.
Spec off. 75 meters to the right of us.
Scratch what?
We got a man down.
Reload.
We lost one. What's your position?
Injured! Hostile down!
1. Report in. Over. 24. Sit rep. 26. Report in. Over.
Man down.
Injured!
Man down. Fuck. Man down.
What's your position?
Sit rep.
He's hit. Medic!
What's your position?
I've got him.
Medic!
23. Report in. Over.
Shit, we got a man down.
5. Sit rep.
Report position. We lost one.
Man down.
Report position.
Sixty. Sit rep.
What's your position? He's hit. Contact, back off.
3. Report in.
What's your position? We got a man down. Medic! What's your position?
Return to formation.
Solid copy.
Cover me. Reloading.
I'm hit! Fuck, I'm hurt!
Okay, so we've made some changes, and I just wanted to talk you through how things are looking. Generally, things are looking better. Things are behaving as I was hoping. So, starting with the init, we've got just a quick reminder that things are running. We probably really don't need that. Then we call markers and the mission params. Then we wait, then we start counting. Now, I made a decision that we didn't want to keep spawning blue 4 units throughout the mission. Instead, we're going to do one spawn for blue at the beginning, and then later on, if you need reinforcements, we're going to have to build that function in, so they won't just be appearing every so often. So I just took out some of the old code, and I've just left in this one-off spawn sequence, which is 5 for me and 10 on each of the flanks. That's it. Okay, so then over to markers. Pretty much is the same, I think, as the last time you looked at this. You've got your main AO, which actually we do need to fix. It's not quite. It worked when we were using the rail pod, but now it's using get pods. It's kind of the wrong way around, but that's not important. We can fix that. Then we've got initial blue for markers, which I think I'm going to take out actually, because we don't need to show them. I'll leave them in for now. We'll do some testing, but I will tidy this up. Then we have the blue markers, which are these three here, which are our objectives, and then you've got the three spawn markers for Op4. So that's all good. And then we call wave SQF. So wave SQF is even simpler now. All we're doing is we are creating groups, we're spawning units into those groups, and then we're moving the units around. So we give it some time to let all of this sort of process. Then we issue orders for blue 1 and blue 2 to move to these positions, and then we move the three red groups to these three positions here, and my unit, which is 5 units, will be sort of supporting blue 1 and blue 2. So this doesn't sequence anything else, this just runs and then it finishes. So this will be called every time we have 0 op4. So 0 op4 we call markers, and markers creates new markers and then calls wave. Wave creates op4 and then moves people around. So far so good. I think that's it. I'm playing around with some ambient flybys as well, so we'll do that in a minute. So yeah, that is pretty much where we are. Let's test it out. Now I'm using a field to make it a bit easier to see what's going on. So the systems chat is telling me that we got 6 enemies, 16 friendlies. The orders have been issued for movement. They are moving in towards these markers here, as are the op4 units. So now what we can do is follow one of these groups and provide a supporting role.
Foot mobiles, 300 meters southwest. Enemy spotted. Soldier, 300 meters, bearing 210.
So those flybys up there, we're going to use something along those lines for reinforcements and ammo drops. So as you can see, the two groups are moving towards their objectives, which have now reset. We've got 6 new enemies to take care of, so we'll just keep pushing forward.
I see movement. Spec up. 300 meters due south. Spec up. 300 meters due south.
Oh, that doesn't look good. So yeah, maybe we need to spread these planes out a bit, because I just saw 3 of them go down. So 4 units left to take care of. We're all in our relative positions. These guys aren't doing too much. So it's not super realistic, but it's something that we can work with. These guys should be doing something a bit
Command,
more
200 meters
realistic,
in front.
Target's down.
Right, so let's see what happens to the markers here. Assuming there's no more Alt 4. Okay, so now we've got our new markers here, and then in a minute these guys will get their orders and should move forward. So it's happening slowly.
I've got a visual.
I mean,
Spec
obviously,
up.
at the
400
moment
meters
this is a
south.
bit of an unfair fight, but like I said, it's something that you can work with, especially with some ambience like that. And potentially this could be a bit different when you get into towns or forests.
Spec off. 300 meters, bearing 150.
I see movement. Spec up. 300 meters bearing 150.
One thing we could do possibly is instead of having these markers created per wave, we could potentially sync them to the location of the player, so that this is almost like a very rough formation that would be periodically readjusted based on where I am. So if I moved down to say here, we could cycle this every 10-20 seconds to replace these markers. So that's something I'll think about. But anyway, so far things seem to be working roughly as planned. These guys know what they're doing. Okay, so I have got things in a pretty good state. So basically what we've got here is my IDE, Visual Studio Code. Within that we've got my mission, and then a bunch of other scripts that will run at various points through the mission. You can drop this file in any mission in the editor. It's not specific to any one map, but I'm using the new map for this. And essentially what this will do is let you move into an area with two teams, one on your left, one on your right, and you'll be working through the map southward, and as you progress, enemies will be coming to meet you. And at the moment it's pretty basic, but it is slowly working towards something that is a bit more dynamic. So just to run you through what we've got here so far, we've got some basic initialization scripts. So we're kicking off a markers script and a mission param script. Then we are spawning once only, spawning 3 groups of units, friendly units, one in your group and then 2 groups on your left and right, and then we're triggering a counter script. So the markers essentially defines the various different markers that we're going to be using. We won't use all of these eventually, a lot of these can go, so this is definitely a work in progress, but it's something that will hopefully make it clear what it is we're trying to do. Basically the thing you need to look out for are the blue squares. Those are the objectives. So this runs. You then create a wave.sqf, which is the generation of the opful groups, 3 opful groups, and then we have some only 6 units of wave. Probably ramp that up a bit. Then we've got a bit of time to let all of this process before we start to move our blue units towards the objectives. So we've got 2 sets of orders, and each group moves to its own blue square, and then once that's in progress, then the red units move in also to the blue square, and they have a big old fight. And then once you get to a state where, and just clicking over to counter, get to a state where the op4 count is 0, then it will trigger the markers and everything will commence again, but with new waypoints relative to where your player is. So if you're standing in the same position, then it will generate the same marker positions, but the idea is that you'll be progressing through the map, so you'll slowly have new objectives to take. That can go, I don't know why that's there. And one other thing to mention is that I have synced this with my GitHub account, so everything is now available to copy. When you do download this, it may not be this particular mission version, sorry. In fact, it probably won't be because this is a work in progress. But if you do want to just grab the code and play around with it, then there's a link If you're looking at this on YouTube, it will be in the description. But this is also on my website, sqf.codes. Just so you're aware, these git attributes and git ignore, we don't need to worry about that. That is just to make it easy for me to upload this periodically when I make changes, so that you should always get the latest version of the code. And what git ignore does is basically just ignores the mission that I'm using, so you'll never see that. So if you do want to use this code, all you need to do is just copy all of the files and dump it into an empty mission of your map of choosing, and it should just work. Okay, so that's probably enough for now. Let's see what the mission looks like.
Spec Ops, 300 meters southeast.
Spec Op, 300 meters southeast.
Rifleman, 100 meters right. Soldiers, 100 meters right. Soldier, 100 meters left. I've got a visual. Man, 200 meters right.
Spec Op, 100 meters front.
Advance. I've got a visual. Spec up. 300 meters, bearing 285.
Six. Target that spec off. Front. Spec off. 100 meters. 7. Target that spec off.
Enemy spotted. Back up. 75 meters. Front.
Enemy spotted. Spec up. 75 meters front.
Soldier. 100 meters. Front.
Contact. Spec off.
Rifleman. 75 meters left. Spec up. 75 meters left.
Back up. 100 meters. Back.
Reloading. Contact. Spec Ops, 100 meters front. Spec Ops, 200 meters front. Spec Op, 75 meters front. Man, 75 meters front. Contact, rifle, 75 meters front.
Wounded.
Spec Op, 100 meters right. Spec Op, 75 meters front.
He's hit.